In this video, we will review required income documentation and how to complete the income calculation workbook. During the video, you will hear from me, Jessica Pavogel, the HSP coordinator, and Savannah Gonzalez, an HCD analyst that specializes in HSP. Before we begin the training, let's go over the resources that will help you with the HSP income calculations. All of these resources can be found on the Resources tab of the HSP public website. The address to the public website is listed on your screen. The 2020 HSP Eligibility Questionnaire is a questionnaire that you can use while interviewing the household to determine if they are eligible to receive HSP grant funds. This is a tool meant to help you determine eligibility and should not be submitted to us with the income documentation. We ask that you do not submit the questionnaire with your HSP reservation. The AHP HSP Income Calculation Guide specifically states the required documentation that should be submitted, dependent on the household member's income sources. This guide also provides detailed information on how to complete the income calculation workbook. The 2020 HSP Income Calculation Workbook is the workbook that is required to be used for the 2020 HSP. Outdated workbooks will not be accepted. Do not save the 2020 HSP Income Calculation Workbook on your computer to be reused for multiple households. Instead, obtain a new income calculation workbook from the HSP website for each household. The 2020 HSP income limits break down the income limits by state, county, and household size. When viewing this document, you don't have to do any calculations to determine what the income limit is, because the income limits are already broken down to 80% of the AMI.
Now we are going to discuss who is a household member. It's important to remember that your loan application and the grant reservation are separate. Just because they are not on the loan does not mean they could be excluded from the household. Anyone who will occupy the house is a household member. This list has some of the most common household members but is not all-inclusive. Spouses. Please note, if your borrower is going through a divorce, it must be finalized before the reservation is submitted. Just filing for divorce is not sufficient. Fiancés. Even if they are not currently living together, if they intend to live in the home together, then the fiancé is a household member and should be included in the reservation. Roommates includes all persons living in the home, even if it's part-time. For example, if someone stays there during the week because it's closer to their job, they're a household member. Children should always be included, even if they are there only part-time. For example, if the parent has a child that lives far away and only stays with them during the summer, this child is a household member regardless of when the reservation is submitted. He or she will be living there. Other occupants such as aging parents, foster children, and live-in nannies should also be included in the household. This does not include home health aides that are not family members. Those may be excluded. All co-owners and co-borrowers must live in the home and their income must be included. What income should be included? Here are some of the most common types of incomes, but it is important that you are asking the home buyers the right questions. Don't assume that they consider all these items income or that they know to tell you about them. A good resource is the eligibility questionnaire on our website. A basic way to think of this is that if there's money coming into the home, regardless of the source, it is income.
The most common income that must be documented are household members that are W-2 employees, meaning that they are paid either a salary or an hourly wage. The required income document is either one Paystub or a VOE completed by the employer that accurately represents the household member's income. The Paystub or VOE must be dated within 60 days of the reservation submission and include at least 28 days of year-to-date earnings. A few helpful hints to ensure a quick reservation approval are: do not submit a Paystub that shows holiday, sick, or vacation paid in addition to regular hours. The high end of the range for hours is required to be used when completing the income calculation workbook. If a Paystub is provided showing holiday, sick, or vacation paid in addition to the regular hours, it could increase the household income significantly and possibly disqualify the household from receiving HSP grant funds. Do not submit excessive amounts of income documentation. We really only need one pay stub or a VOE. Do not submit both a pay stub and VOE. Do not submit more than one pay stub. Submitting excessive amounts of income documentation will delay the reservation approval because we are required to review all documentation submitted. Do not provide W-2s or tax returns for salary or hourly household members. For self-employed household members, we have updated our income documentation guidelines to make them easier. If the homebuyer was self-employed during 2019, provide the signed 2019 tax return along with the dates of self-employment that the tax return represents. For example, if the household member was self-employed all of 2019, the signed 2019 tax return is the required document. If the household member started the self-employment in May of 2019, the signed 2019 tax return is still the required income document. A signed profit and loss will only be required if the household member started self-employment after January 1st, 2020, or if the 2019 tax return has not been filed. A few helpful hints to ensure the correct documentation is submitted and a quick reservation approval are: do not provide multiple years of tax returns. We will never request 2 years of tax returns. Only provide the 2019 tax return. Do not provide 1099s or K-1s, but do provide all pages of the tax return, including all schedules. Do not provide a tax return and a profit and loss. We do not need both documents for the same self-employment. Determine what is needed based on the guidelines stated in the AHP-HSP Income Calculation Guide. Make sure the tax return or the profit and loss is signed.
Now let's go over how that looks in the workbook. The illustration on your screen has two different calculations shown by two colors of arrows. First, let's review the blue. The year-to-date earnings information is entered directly from the pay stub or VOE, except for the year-to-date start date. The start date is the first day of the first pay period of the year. For most income earners, this is a day in December. For this example, the first pay stub she received in January was for a pay period that began on 12/22. If you have a VOE, you will have to call the employer to determine the year-to-date start date. The information entered into the year-to-date earnings section is independent of all other information, so it is important that the year-to-date total income include all the income. To complete the base wages calculation, use the pay stub or VOE to enter the year-to-date other income and complete the wages box. Do not enter both salary and hourly information, only complete one section. In this example, the borrower is hourly. Enter the hourly rate shown on the pay stub or VOE. Next, determine the hours per week. If your pay stub does not show the pay period beginning and ending date, you must contact the employer for more information. Later in this training, we will discuss the documentation requirements for additional information received from the employer. This pay stub demonstrates that it is for a 2-week pay period, so the hours 79.42 are divided by 2 to get a weekly total for that 2-week period. 52 weeks is entered for the weeks per year. If your borrower works less than 52 weeks per year, please see the seasonal employment portion of this training in the income guide. For this example, the year-to-date other income is overtime earnings and incentive pay. Note that the PTO is not included in the year-to-date other. This box is only for income received in addition to earnings, not income received in lieu of earnings. Income such as sick leave or vacation that an employee uses in place of working their regular schedule is earned in place of earnings and is not included in the year-to-date other, whereas overtime is income earned on top of their regular schedule. Income for holidays paid at time and a half would also go into year-to-date other, along with bonuses, incentives, tips, commissions, etc. In order to complete the self-employment section, start by answering the question if the tax return has been filed. In this example, the tax return has been filed and does represent an entire year. Enter the information from the tax return. If the tax return does not represent an entire year, complete using only the time frame in which the home buyer was self-employed. For this example, the borrower was employed the entire year. However, if your borrower started their business on, say, May 1st, the tax return start date would then be May 1st.
If a household member receives child support and/or alimony, the income is required to be disclosed at reservation submission. We will accept a formal statement from a state or local authority that includes at least 60 days of history, or all pages of an executed and recorded court order. A couple helpful hints to ensure the income documentation meets HSP calculation guidelines are: make sure the household member's name is included on the documentation provided, and if a court order is provided, make sure the recording information is visible on the document. If a household member receives Social Security or SSI for themselves or for the benefit of another household member, provide all pages of the current award letter. The award letter must designate the benefits for 2020. We cannot accept the household member's bank statements documenting the net Social Security benefit. Please do not provide bank statements to us as income documentation. Make sure the gross benefit can be determined with the documentation that is provided, and use the gross benefit to complete the income calculation workbook. If we are unable to determine the gross benefit, clarification will be sent to provide additional documentation. We highly encourage that you provide all pages of the Social Security or SSI award letter.
The documentation for this section is pretty straightforward. However, it is important that the information is put in the correct section or approval will be delayed. If you put Social Security income in the child support box, then we are required to follow up to ensure there is not child support income and documentation missing from the file.
If a household member receives any type of retirement income, provide the 2019 1099, all pages of the current award letter from the retirement income source that designates the 2020 benefit, or all pages of the current statement from the retirement income source that designates the 2020 benefit. Just like Social Security and SSI, do not provide the household member's bank statements showing net deposits. The gross retirement income has to be determined to complete the income calculation workbook. Only provide one of the required income documents that adequately determines the gross retirement income. We have made some changes to how seasonal income can be documented, as well as how the income calculation workbook needs to be completed. First, determine if the employment is seasonal. Seasonal employment means the household member does not work the entire year. Some examples of seasonal employment are a lifeguard who only works in the summer, a school district para that only works when school is in session, or maybe a construction worker that is unable to work in the winter due to the weather. Do not confuse seasonal employment with part-time, year-round employment. If you determine that the employment is seasonal and the 2019 W-2 represents an entire season of employment, provide the W-2. Along with the W-2, we will need verbal or written verification from the employer that the W-2 represents a full season of employment. For example, if the household member is a school district para and was employed as a para from January 19 through December 19, the W-2 can be provided along with employer verification. But if the para started employment with the school district in August of 19 and was not employed by the school district starting January 19, the W-2 cannot be provided as income documentation. If a W-2 cannot be provided for seasonal employment, provide a Paystub or VOE and complete the seasonal section in the income calculation workbook. Along with the Paystub or VOE, you will need to provide verbal or written verification from the employer that documents the number of weeks the household member will work this year and that the employment meets the Federal Home Loan Bank definition of seasonal employment. If the household member has regularly received unemployment benefits in the past years, the unemployment income will need to be disclosed and included in the income calculation. Unemployment benefits are not received for all seasonal type employment, but it is common, for example, for construction workers to receive unemployment benefits.
If you have a W-2, complete the year-to-date earnings in the wages section. See how the example includes a note that explains the type of seasonal employment and confirmation that the W-2 represents the entire season. If you have a VOE for your seasonal borrower, you must complete the seasonal income section. The VOE must have the 6 parts listed on this page. If you cannot complete all 6 boxes for this section, the VOE is not sufficient and additional information will be required from the employer. Those 6 items include the number of weeks the homebuyer will work, the number of weeks worked year-to-date, the year-to-date total income, the year-to-date earnings breakdown, the hourly rate, and the hours per week.
Non-traditional income includes household members that are not paid an hourly wage or a salary. Some examples of non-traditional income are household members paid per load, paid by the mile, or paid straight commission. If the household member's income is non-traditional, provide the 2019 W-2. Along with the W-2, provide verbal or written verification from the employer verifying the dates of employment that are represented on the W-2, and confirmation from the employer that the income meets Federal Home Loan Bank's definition of non-traditional income. If the 2019 W-2 cannot be provided, a current pay stub or VOE will be accepted.
To enter this into the workbook, it's similar to the seasonal W-2. If you have a non-traditional borrower, complete the year-to-date earnings of the wages section. See how the example includes a note that explains the type of employment and confirmation that the W-2 represents an entire year. If you have a pay stub or VOE for a non-traditional borrower, complete only the year-to-date wages based on that document. Additional information is not needed for this example because the pay stub clearly shows that the homebuyer is paid by the mile. If this was not on the pay stub or the pay stub was not clear about how the income was earned, additional notes would be required, including an explanation directly from the employer. Remember, homebuyer explanations are not acceptable.
In some circumstances, the income document doesn't provide all the information needed to complete the income calculation workbook, and verification from the employer is required. Typically, verbal or written verification from the employer will be accepted. For example, we will accept verbal or written verification from the employer to verify pay schedules or frequency, the reason for an income calculation discrepancy, or the additional information needed as described earlier when the income is determined to be seasonal or non-traditional. However, there are some circumstances that verbal verification from the employer will not be accepted, and written verification will need to be obtained from the employer. Those circumstances include earnings and wages. Figures such as these always have to be documented in writing from the employer. Another example that requires written verification from the employer is non-recurring income that needs to be shown as a one-time earning in the income calculation workbook to qualify the household for HSP grant funds. In these circumstances, the employer must state in writing that the household member will not receive the earning again for the remainder of 2020. For both verbal and written verifications, the employer representative's title or position, the name of the employer representative, and an explanation or summary of your conversation with the employer representative must be included. Verbal employer verifications can be documented in the explanation notes section of the income calculation workbook. Written verifications from the employer can be uploaded at the bottom of the household income screen with the income documentation.
On occasion, when you are entering information into the income calculation workbook, you will have a discrepancy. Note on your screen where it's highlighted in yellow a red warning that indicates there is a discrepancy. Anytime there's a difference of $3,000 or more between the year-to-date income annualized and the total base wages plus other income, an explanation is required. Determining what is causing your discrepancy can assist you when calling your employers. Determine which calculation is higher, year-to-date income or base wages. If the year-to-date income is higher, check the year-to-date start date and ensure year-to-date other income was included in that section. If the base wages is higher, was your homebuyer off work unpaid? Did the homebuyer receive a raise? Was the year-to-date total income entered into the workbook correctly? Hours per week can cause a discrepancy either way. If your pay stub does not accurately represent a true amount of hours worked in a pay period, that can cause a discrepancy. Do not provide a workbook with a red warning and no explanation. Please remember, all explanations must come directly from the employer. Homebuyer explanations are not allowed.
If you have questions regarding HSP income calculations, please call us toll-free at 866-571-8155 or send an email to our general HSP inbox as shown on the screen. If you choose to email us, please do not include any income documentation in the email. Email is not secure, and income documents contain personally identifiable information. We will not review income documentation that is emailed to us. Thank you for viewing the HSP income calculation video. We hope that you find the information provided in this video to be helpful when determining household eligibility for HSP grant funds.